Let me tell you a story about an abandoned motel called the Royal Hawaiian Motel. It has been abandoned for over a decade. I often explore urban areas alone, sometimes at night. The Royal Hawaiian Motel is in Baker, California. During the day, it gets extremely hot, so I decided to visit the motel at night. It was easy to get to. I parked on the side of the road and walked over. There was no fence or security, making it one of the easier places I've explored. In the back, there was a deep pool covered in graffiti. When I shined my flashlight at the motel, I noticed that many of the upstairs room doors were either slightly open or shattered. It looked creepy, but was expected since it had been abandoned for so long. Other people had clearly explored it before. Part of the motel had also been partially burned. I walked around outside for a while. Since it was late at night, there were no sounds of traffic, just my shoes crunching on debris. At one point, I heard a female voice nearby. My first thought was that it might be a security worker or someone who could cause trouble for me. I usually hide in these situations, so I ran to one of the ground level rooms and turned off my flashlight. After a minute of hearing nothing, I turned the light back on. The room I was in had graffiti-covered walls, a small dresser with 4 drawers, and an old, dirty mattress on the floor. I wondered if homeless people slept there, but it seemed too far from any town. I left the room and continued exploring the motel. I peeked into every ground floor opening under the upper-level walkway. Each room had different graffiti and old furniture. Then I heard a crash from above, like something falling. My heart skipped a beat. I went outside and pointed my flashlight at the walkway above. Despite my fear, I decided to go up and check out the rooms. I thought there might be an animal in one of the rooms, but there was always a chance of encountering other explorers or a homeless person. I went upstairs and peeked into each room I passed. They all had junk, debris, old mattresses, and furniture. As I walked further, I heard a banging sound. It got louder as I approached. It was a slow, consistent thump, like someone was there. I reached the door where the sound was coming from, and it suddenly stopped. Maybe they heard my footsteps. I announced that I was just an explorer and meant no harm. I peeked into the dark room, and I was almost sure I saw the shape of a person by the back wall. The room smelled awful, like feces. I pulled my head out and looked at my flashlight, careful not to point it into the room right away. I aimed it at the floor and then slowly into the room. I saw 2 pale, bare feet coming towards me fast. I quickly pointed the light up and saw a woman with a bloody forehead and yellow stuff on her mouth. It was like a nightmare. I ran as fast as I could, hearing her scream behind me. She was chasing me. I ran down the stairs and all the way back to my car. She didn't follow me that far. I called my friend George, who also likes urban exploration. I had invited him to come with me, but he couldn't. I told him what happened. We concluded that the banging sound was the woman hitting her head against the wall, which explained her bloody forehead. When I wondered if I should call the police, George advised against it because it would mean admitting to trespassing. I tried to find a payphone to anonymously call the police, but they are hard to find these days. Finally, I called the non-emergency number and reported the woman, claiming someone else had found her. I was vague and hung up quickly. I don't know if the police investigated, but that woman needed help. In all my years of exploring, I had never encountered anything like that. A few years ago, I lived in a small town. My family decided to move 4 hours away to escape the drama. While my parents were out of town looking at houses, I invited my friend over and called my cousins for a road trip. The place I wanted to visit was off limits, but we were daredevils seeking a scary experience. We chose a place called Bryce Hospital, 2 to 3 hours away. This hospital was supposedly haunted due to its history as a psychiatric facility where patients were mistreated and tortured. As the population declined, it was shut down. Over the years, the building rotted and succumbed to nature. We decided to leave around 11 p.m. to arrive by 2 a.m. The car ride was fun, and we were all excited about what we might find. We arrived at 2:43 a.m. and stopped at the start of the dirt road leading to the hospital. We sat for a few minutes, wondering if we should go ahead, because we already had a bad feeling. After 10 minutes, we decided to continue. The road seemed endless, with overgrown grass and branches everywhere. It was pitch black, and we could barely see the road. Finally, we reached the building and stared in amazement. It was huge, with a rotted roof and vines growing over the walls. In the middle of what used to be the parking lot was an old water fountain covered in vines. It was so dark that we could only see what the headlights illuminated. We turned off the car and got out. As we walked into the building, the first thing I noticed was pentagrams sprayed all over the walls. We kept going and made our way up the stairs, which were almost non-existent. We climbed a ladder to reach what was left of the roof. We saw a light in front of the building that looked like a phone light. We called out, but no one answered, and the light vanished quickly. My cousin suggested we follow him into another room to stay safe, but I had a terrible feeling. I wandered into a room beside the one they were in. I saw old mattresses and more graffiti. I heard my cousins talking when suddenly I heard a faint sound like someone threw a rock at the window. I ignored it and kept looking around. Then I rejoined my cousins and friend, and we decided to check out the basement. Getting down there was hard because the stairs were smashed. We sat to catch our breath until we heard a voice from the back of the room. We all paused and looked at each other. I was too scared to move, fearing whoever was there would come after me. My cousin walked back slowly, shining his light. At the far end, he saw someone squatting, facing the wall. My cousin backed up slowly, keeping the light on the person. Once he reached us, we climbed out of the basement. My cousin yelled to the man, asking if he was okay. The man turned and stared blankly at us. There was a moment of silence before he let out wild screams and ran towards us. We all screamed and ran away. We didn't know where to run, but ended up climbing out of a window into the woods behind the building. I remember running and screaming, hearing the man right behind me. My cousins were far ahead, and I saw their flashlights fading. I ran into so many trees that my whole body started to ache. I finally caught up to them in a clearing. We found a trail and tried to find our way back to the car, but went the wrong way for an hour. We turned back and tried the other direction. It was a grueling journey, but we finally saw the building again and felt relieved knowing we were close to the car. As we approached the car, we heard rustling in the bushes. A rock flew out and hit my friend. The man emerged from the bush, and we had to run for the car. He was far enough behind us that we could get in and lock the doors. We started the car, and the headlights showed the man running towards us. He started banging on the windows with a glass bottle. We drove off quickly. The whole ride home, we sat in silence, all in shock. My body was shaking. After that night, we lost all interest in urban exploring. This happened in the countryside of Georgia. I was 15 at the time, and my brother Seb, who was 18, was big on exploring creepy places. He heard about a huge abandoned house not far from us from someone he knew. I guess he didn't want to explore it alone, so one day he brought me along to check it out. We parked the car in a hidden location covered by trees. The house wasn't visible from there, and we had to walk down a concrete road that hadn't been touched in forever. The road was full of giant cracks with grass and weeds growing through them. All the grass around the road was overgrown, almost overtaken with weeds. Suddenly, we noticed a woman walking behind us. I asked Seb what we should do, and he said to play it cool. If we started to run, it would look suspicious. The woman was walking with her hands folded behind her back, as if she were going for a relaxing stroll. We kept walking at our regular pace, maybe picking it up a bit. I turned around once more, and she was much closer now, smiling at me. She said, "Lovely day today, isn't it?" My brother and I simultaneously responded, "Yeah." She kept walking behind us, getting closer and closer. Now, she was almost right on top of us with her hands still folded behind her back. She said, "I have to go to bed now." Seb and I looked at each other with confused expressions. We both picked up the pace without saying a word. We just saw in each other's faces that it was time to speed up and get away from this woman. My brother turned around one last time and said, "Have a great day, Ma," and we stayed at the speed walk pace for a while. The next time we turned around, The woman was gone completely off the road, which meant she must have taken off into the woods. It was incredibly creepy and a chilling start to our little field trip. We made it to the house. It was noticeably deteriorated, with vines of ivy growing up certain parts of the walls. Some of the glass windows were shattered, indicating it had been explored before. We entered the house through one of the broken windows, climbing in carefully to avoid cutting ourselves on the glass. Surprisingly, there was a lot of stuff left behind, like all the furniture. It looked a little worn out. The wall decor, the little decorations on the coffee table, and even the food items in the fridge were still there, though they were very rotten. Opening that fridge was like getting smacked in the face with the smell of death. After checking the whole first floor, we went down to the basement. Like the first floor, the basement was still completely furnished, although it was much messier. There were loose sheets of paper and garbage spread out on the floor. The carpet was a faded blue color. A little bit of light came into the room through the windows at the top of the walls. Then, we heard a noise from upstairs, a distinct thump. We both froze like statues, waiting for any more noise. After a few seconds, we chalked it up to the sound of an old, deteriorating house. There wasn't much else to see in the basement, so we went back up to the first floor. The only place left to check was the upstairs. At the top of the stairs, there was a bathroom directly in front of us. To the left was a small hallway that led to an open door, and then the hallway turned left. I don't remember what was to the right, but I'll tell you why in a second. Seb and I went left and into the first doorway. It was a bedroom, decently sized but not the master bedroom. There was a double bed and an antique-looking dresser with old articles of clothing inside. Nothing I wanted to touch. Seb left the room first. Then he called my name in a very concerned, scared tone. I looked up at him, and he was staring down the hall. I stepped into the hall and saw what he was looking at. The woman from earlier was standing in front of the bed in another bedroom at the end of the hallway, still smiling. She opened her mouth and said, "Do you want to see what's behind my back?" My brother screamed, "Fuck you," and pushed me to start running. We both made a beeline for the front door and sprinted outside. I couldn't help but look back at the house, expecting to see her at one of the upstairs windows, but she wasn't there. I also wanted to make sure she wasn't chasing us. We kept running until we were out of sight of the house, and then we kept running some more. Even though my cardio sucked and I was out of breath, we finally made it back to the car. I gagged, trying to throw up from exhaustion. We got in the car, and Seb drove us home. The whole ride, we couldn't stop theorizing about what had just happened. We thought she might have been a loony woman off her meds or escaped from a mental facility. Maybe she was living in that abandoned house. But even explaining all that away, the big question was, what did she have behind her back? Had she been holding it the whole time she was walking behind us? So many questions will never be answered. Starting a new job is always a mix of excitement and nerves. When I landed a summer job at a local carnival in downtown LA, I was just looking for some extra cash before my senior year of college. The carnival had the usual rides, games, and food stands, but its main attraction was the fun house, which turned into a haunted house after dark. It was actually a solid structure that used to be an old mansion. I was assigned to manage the fun house, which was a favorite among the carnival goers. My job was simple: guide the guests in, ensure they had a fun, safe time, and watch them leave. At first, everything seemed straightforward, but then I started noticing odd things. Small discrepancies began to appear. I counted a dozen people entering, but only 11 would emerge. At first, I thought I was miscounting. After all, keeping track in the chaos of laughter and screams was no easy task. However, as the days passed, the numbers just didn't add up. 7 went in, 6 came out. 10 went in, 9 came out. I felt like I was going crazy. Something was off, and I couldn't ignore it much longer. One particularly busy afternoon, a blonde girl caught my eye as she walked up to the funhouse. She was drop-dead gorgeous and seemed out of place amidst the childlike atmosphere. She couldn't have been more than a few years older than me. I had to do a double take. I'm not a weird guy by any means, but I couldn't help but lock eyes with her for a few seconds. She smiled, handed me her ticket, and I directed her into the attraction. After she disappeared into the darkness, I went back to my duties. Time ticked by, and I watched attentively as people entered and exited, sometimes asking me questions. Admittedly, I was paying a little more attention to the guests that night because I wanted to see that girl again and maybe work up the courage to talk to her. Pretty soon, I noticed that groups of people who had entered after her were beginning to emerge. A few more minutes passed, and I started getting worried. She should have been out by now. Compelled by genuine concern, I decided to abandon my post for a few minutes and go looking for her. I stepped inside and locked the entrance door. I began navigating the dimly lit rooms and narrow corridors. I moved through the house until I came across something I had noticed during my initial walkthroughs, a barely noticeable seam in the wall. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but curiosity got the best of me. I pressed against the seam and heard a distinct click. I played around with it some more, and my jaw nearly hit the floor when I realized it was a hidden door. It swung open slowly, revealing a pitch-black hallway. I stood there in shock. What in the world was this doing here? I knew I was going to have a long conversation with my boss about this. I walked into the hallway with my phone's flashlight guiding the way. I didn't have much brain power to be nervous because I was still so shocked. I reached the end of the passage and found another door. I flung it open, and to my surprise, it was a concealed exit that led back to the carnival grounds. I breathed a sigh of relief. This discovery proved I wasn't going crazy. All those people who hadn't been seen leaving the attraction had probably stumbled across that secret door by accident and assumed it was the correct way to go. As I walked back, I couldn't help but feel a little bummed out that I wasn't going to get the chance to talk to that girl. For some reason, I decided to keep exploring the funhouse instead of returning to my post. I think a part of me just wanted a few extra minutes of this impromptu break. I walked through a couple more rooms, and that's when I noticed another faint seam identical to the first one. I again played with it until it clicked and swung open. I could immediately tell this one was different. The putrid smell was the first thing I noticed. More concerning, though, was the fact that there was no corridor in this one, but a ladder leading downwards. I was more confused than anything. This door was on the ground floor, and I was told specifically that this place didn't have a basement. I debated climbing down, but I felt awful about the prospect that the girl might be down there. Against my instincts, I began to descend. The smell only got worse as I climbed down into the darkness. I expected to find a basement, but what I found instead was far worse. I reached the bottom and pulled out my phone's flashlight. I was frozen in shock. I was standing in a tunnel that extended into the darkness. There was no way this was part of the house above. The rational part of my brain screamed to turn back and forget about it, but the mystery was too compelling. I ventured further, being careful not to make any noise. The walls were damp, and the tunnel was completely silent. As I explored, my flashlight beam fell on something unexpected, a white glittery purse sitting in the middle of the corridor. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It looked familiar, and then it hit me. It was that girl's purse. I was sure of it. I started to panic. Was she really down here? I doubted there was any way a rational person could find this tunnel and not turn around, but the proof was in my hands. My mind started racing. Was she hurt? Lost? And then a more terrifying thought hit me. Was she alone? I didn't feel safe anymore, but I was in too deep. Violating every survival instinct I had, I yelled out into the tunnel for her. I waited. Nothing. I was just about to shout again when I heard the sound of rapid footsteps echoing through the tunnels. My first instinct was to run. I had every reason to believe whoever was running towards me was hostile. I turned around and bolted back to the ladder. I got halfway up and slipped, falling back to the bottom. The footsteps were right on top of me now. I knew I was done for. I braced myself for a fight, and then a voice rang out, a girl's voice. Her voice. She gasped, helped me clutching her side as if in pain. I yelled at her to climb up, but she insisted that I follow her back into the darkness. I told her there was no chance I was doing that and basically forced her up the ladder. We got to the top, and I slammed the door shut. I asked her how in the world she ended up down there, and she couldn't give me a straight answer. She kept saying she didn't really remember how it happened, just that she suddenly realized she was underground. She said she started hearing things moving in the dark and voices calling to her. I didn't know how to process this. I asked her if someone had guided her down there, and she said she didn't remember. The weirdest thing was the blank stare she gave me, which genuinely freaked me out. I basically interrogated her about why she told me to stay down there, but she didn't answer. I had had enough. I wanted to get as far away from this person as possible. I called the police, but she opted to leave the funhouse before they got there. I never saw her again. The police investigated, and what they found was actually insane. Apparently, this house had been some sort of safe house during Prohibition in the 1920s. As such, it had a bunch of secret passageways that led to a section of the underground Prohibition tunnels that hadn't been discovered. The owner claimed he had no idea about the house's history, but I was skeptical. I quit my job and got as far away from there as possible. I still have so many questions. Did the owner know about this? Was that girl kidnapped? Did someone knock her out and take her down there? Was she part of the whole thing? There are a number of explanations for what happened, but all of them are equally terrifying. Nam. Ever since you were a kid, you loved carnivals, the lights, the games, the unpredictable joy of it all. Lots of people find them weird and childish, but not you. Growing up in a small town in Indiana, you didn't have much to do. So whenever carnivals rolled through town, you spent as much time there as possible. It's been over 20 years, and you still enjoy the atmosphere of a local carnival. Despite what you're about to hear, your love for carnivals is something you'll never lose. You were about 10 or 11 when this happened, and you were a kind of nerdy kid. In the days leading up to the spring carnival, you found yourself in the library, reading up on whatever interested you at the time. For some reason, you wound up in the history section. The books were literally caked in layers of dust. That's how long it had been since anyone touched them. You were flipping through a book on the history of your town when a small, faded slip of paper fell out from between the pages. Confused, you leaned down to pick it up. To your pleasant surprise, it was a ticket for your local spring carnival dated over 15 years ago. The odds of something like that happening had to be extremely low. You were ecstatic. This ticket would make a great addition to your miscellaneous collection back home. What was even cooler was the fact that the date on the ticket was just 2 days away, when the carnival would be in town. As you predicted, the carnival arrived the next morning, so you figured why not use the old ticket just for laughs to see what the booth attendant would say. You wanted to get punched anyway. The next evening, you headed to the carnival with the ticket safely tucked away in your pocket. As you approached the entrance, the carnival was as lively as ever, the air filled with the scent of cotton candy and popcorn. You pulled out the ticket at the gate, handing it over to the guy at the booth. His face changed the moment he saw it. He went pale, his eyes widening slightly before he masked his reaction with a forced smile. It was honestly a little creepy. "Enjoy your evening," he stammered, handing you back the ticket without punching it. You were so weirded out by his reaction that you forgot to ask him to punch it. You shrugged it off, thinking maybe he was just new and confused about the old design of the ticket. You wandered around, played some games, and enjoyed the funnel cake. The night was perfect, but you couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. You felt eyes on you, observing. Maybe it was just paranoia. You tried to ignore it at first, but you kept noticing the carnival employees giving you weird looks. After a while, you got fed up and decided to ask one of the older game operators about it. You found a kind-looking elderly man running the ring toss booth. You showed him the ticket. Unlike the booth guy, he didn't even try to hide his shock. He glanced around nervously before leaning closer. "Where did you get this?" he asked. After telling him where you found it, you started feeling uneasy about the whole situation. Maybe you should have just kept the ticket at home. You found something you weren't meant to find, the old man started, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This ticket is part of a story that folks around here don't talk about much. About 15 years ago, something terrible happened during the carnival right here in this town." He paused, as if weighing whether to continue. "There was a young worker named Ryan. Nice kid. Everybody liked him. He was responsible for one of the rides. One night, he just disappeared, vanished without a trace. The police found his wallet, but there was nothing in it except a ticket that looked an awful lot like this one, he said, gesturing towards your hand. The atmosphere around you seemed to drop a few degrees. He continued. They searched everywhere, even drained the local pond, but no sign of him. After that, strange things started happening every time the carnival stopped here. Accidents, things going missing, odd sightings. People said it was Ryan trying to come back or something worse that took him. You could feel a chill running down your spine, but a part of you was skeptical, and you believed that you asked. The old man shrugged. I've seen enough to keep an open mind. But the point is, the ticket you found might stir things up. It's best you get rid of it. Leave it here. He then motioned for you to give it to him. You were reluctant. You looked down at it, reading it over again, as if there was some kind of secret you were missing. How could a ticket be the cause of all that? Still not fully buying it. The look in his eye got darker. His tone switched almost as if he were angry. He told you to give it here almost in a growl. You considered it but concluded that some stupid story wasn't worth giving up such a cool souvenir. You told him no, and he actually sprang up with a quickness that startled you. He reached for the ticket, his fingers grazing your hand. You jerked back instinctively, clutching the ticket tighter. The old man's expression morphed into something desperate, almost predatory. You don't understand, he said, his eyes darting around, as if expecting something or someone to emerge from the shadows. You backed away towards the tent's exit, your heart pounding. I think I should go, you stammered, turning to lose yourself in the crowd. Behind you, you could hear his calls, a mix of pleading and warning. You didn't care what he was saying, though. You let the bustling crowd around you drown his voice out. Your mind was racing. Not even about the ticket, but more so his aggressive reaction. The joy of the carnival had been spoiled. You left earlier than planned, the ticket burning a hole in your pocket. Over the next few days, your luck seemed to turn sharply. You missed catching the school bus, scraped your knee pretty badly in a bike accident, and worst of all, your best friend accused you of stealing his favorite baseball card, something you would never do. Things got worse than that, though. You remember coming home one night to your mother in tears after losing her job. Your brother broke his leg skateboarding the next week, and your beloved family pet passed away a few days after that. It was like a dark cloud had settled over you since that night at the carnival. You couldn't help but remember the old man's warning about the ticket stirring things up. It seemed ridiculous, but then again, so was the string of bad luck that followed you. Your dad laughed when you told him about your theory. He told you there was no such thing as ghosts, and that you shouldn't be so superstitious. One rainy afternoon after school, after a particularly tough day where you had forgotten your lunch and had to go hungry, you pulled the ticket out. You stared at it, the small piece of paper that had brought nothing but trouble. Feeling a mix of anger and fear, you decided you had had enough. You grabbed your raincoat and boots and trudged out to the creek that ran behind your house. Your heart felt like it was pounding out of your chest as the rain soaked through your hair. Standing at the creek's edge, you took one last look at the ticket before tearing it into tiny pieces and watching them get swept up by the current. It's just a piece of paper, you thought. Things started to look up after that. Your friend found his baseball card and apologized to you, and you became friends again. You didn't miss the bus a single time that school year. Your mom got a better job in the next couple of days. Whether it was all a coincidence or that ticket really was cursed, you couldn't say. But one thing was for sure, you learned to be more careful about what you picked up and brought home. You don't believe in the supernatural, even after all this stuff happened to you. Your parents liked telling you that you imagined everything because you were so young. It's still hard to fully explain it, but you've long since accepted it as one of those weird coincidences that you just can't explain. I hate carnivals. They're disgusting and filled with children. I hate the food, the games, and the smell of it all. My hatred of carnivals is probably biased, though, mostly based on what I'm about to tell you. A few years ago, my younger sister dragged me to our local carnival. I wasn't going to be rude and refuse, but I wasn't looking forward to it. After a while, my sister got bored and wanted to leave, so I called my mom to pick us up. I opted not to go with them since I was in the midst of a fight with my dad and didn't want to go back home until he was asleep. I told my mom I'd walk home later, so she picked up my sister and left. The carnival was honestly a little pathetic. There were far fewer people there that night than I remembered from previous years, and everyone looked miserable. I figured I might as well walk around a bit to get my money's worth since I had paid for a ticket out of my own pocket. I decided to step into the funhouse, thinking it would at least be a little cool. I expected it to be crowded, but it was completely empty. There wasn't a single other person in there as far as I could tell. I had never been inside a funhouse alone before. People don't realize how important the laughter and talking are to the atmosphere. Without it, you're basically just standing there in silence surrounded by a bunch of weird mirrors. It was honestly a little creepy. I shrugged and figured I might as well walk through it. Admittedly, I did get a pretty good laugh out of the distorted mirrors. I think I was halfway through when I noticed something odd. In one of the reflections to my left, there was a head that seemed to be peering at me. I only saw it for a split second, but it was a bald guy with really sunken eyes. I whipped around but didn't see anyone. To be completely honest, I had no idea where he had even been standing since there were mirrors all over the place. He could have been anywhere. I thought it was especially creepy since I didn't hear the funhouse entrance open. He either snuck in behind me or had already been inside. I kept walking, going a little more quickly now. Then I saw him again, out of the corner of my eye. He had this strange smile this time. It was the exact same face, I was positive. I tried to figure out where he was standing, but the reflections were too confusing. I yelled for him to get lost but got no response. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. I picked up the pace again, but it was difficult trying to navigate this maze of mirrors and I kept hitting dead ends. I started sweating, constantly looking over my shoulder every few seconds. A few minutes later, I turned a corner after hitting another dead end, and two hands reached out from behind one of the mirrors, grabbing my wrist. I screamed, cursing at the guy to let go of me, but he held firm. I punched his arm, forcing him to let go. I fell to the ground in the fray and saw the creep's full form. He was wearing all gray, had a bit of a gut, and his face was tired and sunken. I jumped to my feet before he could reach for me again and sprinted back the way I came. I don't know if it was survival instincts or not, but finding my way back to the entrance was somehow easier with adrenaline coursing through my veins. I sprinted out of the funhouse and caught my breath. I reached into my back pocket, and a horrifying realization hit me. I didn't have my wallet. I must have dropped it when I fell. There was no way I was going back in there. After running to the nearest staff person, I told them everything that happened. She seemed confused and told me the funhouse was closed to patrons that night. I was horrified. They called the police and searched it but found nothing, not even my wallet. I felt like such an idiot. I told them that the guy was probably an ex-employee with a key, but they shrugged off my theory and told me to go home. So reluctantly, that's what I did. It's not like I had gotten hurt or anything. I wish I could tell you the story ended there, but it didn't. A week later, my girlfriend called me one night in a panic, frantically screaming into the phone about something terrible that had happened. Apparently, someone had been texting her phone pretending to be me and convinced her to drive out to a remote location to help me change a tire. Thankfully, she decided to bring her dad even though the guy told her to come alone. They quickly realized what was going on when the car parked in the lot wasn't mine. Her dad stepped out of the car, and 6 dudes stepped out of the car in front of them. He sprinted back to the car and hightailed it out of there before those guys could catch up to him. The whole thing made sense. I did have my girlfriend's number written down on a slip of paper in my wallet, which explains how he got her number. Both of us changed all our contact information, and it's been a month without incident. I really don't know how to feel about this whole ordeal. I think I'm just going to try to block the memory out of my head. D. Growing up in rural Michigan, there was hardly anything to do. If you like staring at trees and crops and having lots of alone time, that was the place to be. I got out of there as soon as I got a car and enough money to move. I'm not a nature hater, but I'd pick being by a big city any day. My parents don't own that property anymore. They sold it 5 years ago. It was a 3-acre property. The house itself was pretty big, and there was a storage building out back. I was 13 when this happened. My parents would leave me alone often at this age. They trusted me because I matured at a young age and had responsibilities on the property. It was a weekend, and I was playing Vice City on my PS2 in the living room when suddenly a loud metallic bang came from outside somewhere in the yard. I immediately ran to every window I could to look outside, but I didn't see anything until I got to the window looking out to the storage building out back. The door to it was completely open. I went to grab the rifle from the closet and went outside. I made my presence known, shouting, "Who's in there?" but got no response. When I got to the door, I made it known I had a gun before looking inside. There was a bunch of stuff in there, from the sit-down mower to the quad to infinite little lawn care items. Someone could have been hiding behind any of that stuff. Even as a kid, I didn't scare easily, but at that moment, I got really unsettled. I closed the door to the building and went back inside the house. I locked the door and then sat at the window for the longest time, watching the storage building, expecting the door to open at any second. That door was heavy and impossible to just open by itself. It was a fact that someone came and opened it. Whether they were still inside the building, I wasn't sure. I decided to call my dad and ask his opinion. I went to the kitchen to the landline phone and called my dad's cell phone. He didn't pick up, so I left a voicemail. This was back when you'd still have to leave someone a voicemail because texting wasn't mainstream. After that, I went back to sitting next to the window, but now I put on a TV show in the background to make this less monotonous. I took the phone with me. I was probably about to give up when I heard creaks from upstairs. My heart was now in my throat. I had to ask myself the big question: was I working myself up, or was someone here? I had a serious guard dog mentality. Even if I didn't love that place, I saw it as mine and my family's. I had to protect it, but I was in over my head. I grabbed the rifle again and walked upstairs. I didn't say anything. Calling out would only make a potential intruder know that I heard them. I made it to the top of the stairs and turned on the light for the upstairs hallway. There were 5 doors to open, all of them closed. 4 led to bedrooms, 1 led to the bathroom. Each door had a decently large crack underneath it that allowed you to see under. The creak in the ceiling I heard earlier came from the side of the house my parents' bedroom was on. So I got down on my knees and looked under the crack of the door and saw 2 bare feet facing the other side of the door. I felt my stomach twist into a knot. The reality of the situation became so much more real. I realized I wasn't ready to threaten or, God forbid, shoot someone. I got up and quickly went downstairs and hid in the bathroom to call my dad. He still didn't pick up. I left another voicemail, then called again and again. He never picked up. He must have had his phone set down somewhere. I finally called 911, as I should have done right away, and whispered into the phone the whole time, detailing exactly what was taking place. I was told to sit tight in the bathroom and not say a word. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, and then they approached the bathroom door, as if whoever it was somehow knew I went straight to the bathroom. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and there was a brief pause before a deep voice said, "It's the kid." I still remember the voice and those words so vividly. If I heard that voice today, I'd still recognize it immediately. I almost wanted to cry. That's how scared I was. I disobeyed what the operator told me and spoke. I said loud and clear, "I'm on the phone with the cops right now, and I have a gun." I put the operator on speaker as she was asking me if everything was okay. The man attempted to open the door, and when he realized it was locked, I heard him walk away. I heard the footsteps fade to silence, and then the sound of a door slamming. It was the sound of the back door. I'm sure I breathed a sigh of relief, and from there on, I waited for the police to arrive. When they did, I felt like 1,000,000 pounds had just lifted off my shoulders. After a thorough inspection of the house inside and out, confirming that the man was gone, they asked if there was anywhere else I could stay that night. I said yes, my uncle's house. We contacted my uncle, who came and spoke with the police. Then he took me back to his place. The thing that haunts me the most is that it was my fault. I could have prevented this. I left the door unlocked as I went to the storage building to investigate. Clearly, that's when the man simply walked right into the house. Even with a rifle in my hands, I didn't feel safe at all. It was truly the most horrific experience of my life. When I was 18, my parents went away on a week-long anniversary trip. My sister had already moved out by then, so I had to hold down the fort. My parents' property is enclosed by woods, with a dirt driveway leading to the road. The road is a quiet back road with equally sized properties running alongside it, each separated by a decent distance, giving it a really isolated feel. Everyone in town knows each other, and you see familiar faces all the time at the gas station, grocery store, and bars. One day, while my parents were away, I was at a gas station filling up my tank when a black Jeep Cherokee pulled up to the pump next to mine. A man with a goatee stepped out, greeted me, and started filling his tank. In that town, it was normal for strangers to greet each other like that. He locked his nozzle into the gas tank and then walked around to my side of the pump, asking, "Excuse me, do you know how to get to the interstate from here?" I helped him to the best of my ability. He pulled out a notepad and started writing down the directions I gave him, which was odd since most people would just use their cell phone. He thanked me and asked if I was from the area. I said, "Yeah. I grew up here." He said he was from out of town, but didn't specify where. He then went back to his side, put the nozzle back in the pump, and asked my name as he said, "It's nice meeting you." I said my name was Kate. He said, "What a lovely name," and then got in his car as I got into mine. I drove out first, turning left to go up the road back home. It was only a few minutes of driving before I was approaching our turn into the driveway. I slowed down, put my blinker on, and turned right onto the property. At that moment, I noticed the car behind me was the same black Jeep Cherokee. He passed me as I turned into our driveway, going in the complete opposite direction of the interstate. As he passed, he didn't slow down, so I figured he just forgot the directions and went the wrong way. I let myself inside and went about the rest of my day. That night, as I was going out to meet up with my friends, I stepped outside, walked to my car, and heard footsteps nearby. Since the house is enclosed by woods, and it was the middle of summer, it could have been any number of animals, so I didn't investigate. I just got in my car and left. But when I got back home hours later and walked from my car to the house, a man's voice from somewhere in the woods called out, "Kate." I got the chills, looked around, and then rushed to open the front door. I slammed it shut and sat on the couch to breathe. The neighbors knew my name, but the houses are far apart, so there was no reason for one of them to call my name like that without identifying themselves. I decided to call my parents and tell them. They thought it must have been one of the neighbors and said they'd probably knock on the door. I didn't tell them about the encounter at the gas station. The next day, which was a Saturday, I stayed home most of the day. Later that night, I was going out to meet my friends again. After getting ready, I went outside, and as I walked to my car, I heard someone call, "Kate" again, loud and clear from not too far away. This time, I ran back inside the house and locked the door. I called 911, texting my family while doing so. 2 cops showed up and looked around the perimeter of the property with their flashlights. They came back and told me to call again if it persisted. I didn't feel much better because they didn't do much. I refrained from going outside until the next day when I had work. I was a server at a nearby restaurant and worked late shifts. I left the house in broad daylight, paranoid to hear that voice again. Thankfully, I didn't. After many hours at work, I was ready to go home and collapse into bed. I pulled onto the property, parked my car out front, and walked to the front door. I stopped when I heard footsteps again. It didn't sound like an animal's footsteps. I stood on the front deck for a second, waiting. Then that familiar voice yelled, "Kate, don't call the cops on me again." I yelled back, "You need help. You're sick," and let myself inside. I called the cops once more. They came again, searched the perimeter, and left. My parents told me I should stay at a friend's house for the night. I agreed. They would be back the following night, so I'd feel safer then. My friend Alex told me I could stay with her. I packed a bag and was ready to go. I checked out the windows to make sure the coast was clear. I then went outside, locked the door, and ran to the car. As I turned the key in the ignition, I heard something right outside the driver's side door. It was a man wearing a face mask trying to open the door. I couldn't scream. I felt like I was choking on air. I put the car in drive, and he started hitting the glass with his elbow. I looped my car around on the grass and sped down the driveway, turning right up the road. I didn't stop until I got to Alex's house. I was hysterically crying the whole drive there with Alex and her dad on the phone with me. He said he would have picked me up if he'd known the situation. We called the police together for the third time. A couple of officers went to my parents' house to investigate again and make sure no windows were shattered. One officer came to Alex's house, where I once again described what happened. This was probably the most action these cops had seen in a long time in this quiet town. Thankfully, my parents came home the next day, and I felt safe staying at home again. I fully believe the man at the gas station followed me home intentionally and scoped the place out, realizing I was by myself. For whatever reason, he toyed with me until he actually tried to get me. I shouldn't have given my real name, and I should have been more alert to my surroundings and realized he was following me that day. Some people are nuts and have way too much time on their hands. This incident was a huge motivating factor in my moving out to my own apartment a few months later. I was home alone one night, and I can't remember why. All I know is that my whole family was gone. I was 15 or 16 years old at the time. I was really into gaming back then, especially StarCraft. Sometimes I'd spend weekend nights playing games on my computer. This was just before the COVID lockdown started. I was playing StarCraft in my bedroom on the first floor when the doorbell rang twice. I hurried to the door, not wanting to be away from the game for too long. When I got to the front door, I asked, "Who is it?" as I always did when I was alone. A soft, weak voice on the other side, which sounded like a woman, said something I couldn't hear clearly. I opened the door with the storm door still closed, and there was an older woman standing there with a big smile on her face. She had her hands behind her back. I asked through the door if I could help her. She said she needed to use a phone and asked if she could come inside. Even though I was taught not to let strangers into the house, especially women, I felt awkward. I didn't know how to turn her away. I suggested she go to the library a few blocks down because they would surely have a phone. Deep down, I knew the library was closed at this point, but I just wanted her to leave. She was still smiling, but what she said next didn't match her smile. She said, "That's very rude to turn away an old lady asking for help," I replied. "My parents don't allow strangers into the house. It's a house rule." I slowly started closing the doors, apologizing, but she just stood there, not moving, still smiling at me. Suddenly, her smile felt much more menacing. I went back to my room, and not long after, the doorbell rang again. There was no way I was opening the door again. That woman gave off weird vibes from the start. Maybe something was wrong with her, maybe she wasn't all there. I had no way of knowing. I went back to my game, but then I heard tapping on the window. It was a clinking sound, like metal tapping on glass. My room was the only one with a light on, and the thought of that woman being outside my window terrified me. I turned off the sound on my computer and left the room. I sat in the darkness of the living room for a while when the doorbell rang again. This woman was harassing me now. I tried to convince myself she wasn't a threat, just some crazy old woman who was probably lost. When she rang the doorbell a second and third time, I decided to open the door and ask if there was someone I could call for her. But when I opened the door, there was now a man on the other side. He looked about 10 years younger than her and asked if I had seen his mother. I told him she had come to my door earlier. He apologized and explained that she had dementia and wandered off. He asked if he could come in for a minute, and again, I felt awkward. Why did he need to come inside? I said we could talk through the door and suggested he check the backyard since I heard something out my window. He thanked me and walked down the walkway. but when I looked out the back window, I saw nobody, not him or his mom. It was all too weird for me. I went to bed early that night, just falling asleep with the TV on in the background. Then, a week ago, something similar happened to me again. My friend Cody asked me to watch his dog Theo for the night. Theo's a little Pomsky and he barks a lot. When he started barking like crazy and something was going on outside, I didn't pay much attention until he went to the back door and kept barking. As I got close to the door, I realized someone was trying to open it from the outside. Through the screen door, I saw another guy looking right back at me. This was in the backyard, which was already alarming, and he wasn't someone I recognized as a family member of Cody's. So I asked him who he was. He responded, asking if I'd seen Melissa. Melissa is Cody's younger sister, who's in her 20s. Meanwhile, this guy looked like he was in his mid-50s and homeless. I told him there's no Melissa who lives here and insisted he leave. He asked, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes, you need to leave. There are cameras all over the property." He left right after that, and when Cody asked his sister who that guy could have been, she said she had no idea. The guy looked like he was 55, drunk and filthy. Not exactly someone Cody's 20-something-year-old sister would be associating with. The fact that he went to the back door and tried letting himself in was actually pretty terrifying. These incidents make it clear how important it is to keep your doors locked. You never know who might try to enter your home uninvited.